It started with the sound of laughter that didn't belong here. At first, I thought it was just the neighbors, maybe a late dinner or a party drifting through the hills. But then came the pounding, hard, uneven knocks against the glass doors downstairs, and my brother's voice slurred through the night like an echo I'd tried for years to forget. He was shouting my name, not softly, not like family, more like someone daring me to answer. I froze on the stairs, halfway between my bedroom and the balcony, the hum of the night suddenly sharp and cold. Through the glass, I could see them. My brother and 3 of his friends stumbling through the garden, bottles swinging from their hands, cigarette tips glowing like fireflies. They were laughing at nothing, tripping over the stones, kicking at the small lights I'd planted along the path. He called out again, louder this time. "Come on, open up! Don't act like you don't know your own brother." His words slurred together, soaked in arrogance and whiskey. It was the same tone he used years ago when he'd walk into my room, take my things, and pretend it was a joke. Except now, it wasn't my room anymore. It was my home, my peace. I stood there watching him through the balcony glass, my fingers tightening around the railing. The moonlight caught his face, older, rougher, but still wearing that smirk that said rules were for everyone else. I wanted to yell, to tell him to leave, but my voice didn't come. Instead, I just listened, to the crunch of glass under his shoes, the careless way his friends shouted into the dark. One of them tried to pry open the patio door. Another started kicking at the pool furniture. My chest burned, but not from fear. From something deeper. He had crossed too many lines before, taken our parents' savings, sold the family home, blamed me for the fallout. And now he was here again, acting like none of it happened. Like I was still the quiet one who would just clean up after him. I took a slow breath and reached for my phone, but I didn't call the police. Not yet. I wanted to see what he'd do. I watched as he finally pushed open the side door I'd forgotten to lock, stumbling into the living room as if he owned it. His laughter filled the house, echoing off the walls I had built to keep people like him out. He looked around, calling my name again, softer now, almost affectionate. "You really did well for yourself, huh?" he said, half to himself, half to the others. "Guess little sis finally made it big." They all laughed. My skin went cold. Every word felt like dirt being thrown back in my face. I stepped down from the balcony, each footstep deliberate, controlled. The air smelled like spilled liquor and smoke. From the hallway, I could see him tossing his jacket on my couch, pouring himself a drink from my bar. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with clarity. He didn't just walk into my home that night. He walked back into a life I'd buried, the one I had spent years escaping, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. He thought this house was proof of success, but it wasn't. It was proof of survival. As his laughter faded into the walls, I stood there in the dark, watching him through the half-open door, my heart calm in a way it hadn't been for years. He thought he could barge in again, the way he always did, uninvited, unaccountable. But he was wrong. That night, I made a decision. If he wanted to see how far I'd come, I would show him. Just not the way he expected. The villa had always been more than walls and glass. It was the silence I had fought for, the kind that doesn't come easy when you grow up in a house filled with shouting, slammed doors, and promises that never meant anything. I bought it the year my brother sold our parents' home. He didn't ask. He didn't even call. One day it was ours. The next, gone. Exchanged for money that vanished faster than his guilt. That was the last time we spoke. 2 years of distance that I thought had finally taught him boundaries. But as I stood there that night, listening to his laughter echo through the halls, all those years folded back in on themselves. It wasn't the first time he'd taken something that wasn't his. He used to take my savings, my belongings, my peace, always with that same careless grin, the one that said, "You'll forgive me. You always do." Except this time, I didn't. I remembered the last time I saw him. He'd shown up outside my apartment with a bruise on his cheek and blood on his shirt, asking for money, just to get through the week. I gave it to him, even though I knew I shouldn't. He promised to pay me back, and when he didn't, he called me selfish for expecting it. That was who he was, always the victim in his own story, always twisting guilt into a weapon. The villa was supposed to erase all of that. I chose every detail myself. The marble floors, the quiet stretch of land overlooking the hills, the thick doors that locked with a satisfying click. No noise, no chaos, no one barging in without knocking. It was my sanctuary, a clean slate, until tonight. As I looked at him sprawled across my couch, half drunk and laughing with his friends, I felt something shift. This wasn't just another one of his careless mistakes. It wasn't about money or family anymore. This was intrusion, a deliberate act. He'd broken into the only space I had left untouched. And as I watched the shadows of his friends move through my house like strangers in a dream, I realized something simple and final. This time, it wasn't theft. It was trespass. And trespass always has consequences. Morning came heavy, slow, and silent. The kind of silence that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath. I walked down the stairs barefoot, still in the same clothes from the night before. The air smelled like smoke and cheap liquor. My heart sank before I even reached the living room. It looked like a storm had passed through. Bottles everywhere, cigarette burns on the rug, shards of glass glittering in the sunlight that filtered through the curtains. Someone had spilled red wine down the wall, streaks that looked too much like blood from a distance. My brother was sprawled across the couch, one arm hanging to the floor, snoring softly. His friends lay scattered like wreckage, shoes still on, faces buried in cushions. I didn't move for a moment. I just stood there and stared. It wasn't the mess itself that got to me. It was what it represented. This room, once calm and clean, now looked exactly like every memory I'd tried to leave behind. The chaos, the carelessness, the proof that no matter how far I ran, he still knew how to find a way back in. I walked to the bar, right where he'd poured himself a drink the night before. The bottle was empty, a cigarette stubbed out on the counter. I ran a finger over the burn mark and felt something twist inside me. He hadn't changed, not an inch. He still believed he could break things and walk away before anyone noticed the damage. When he finally stirred, it was slow. A groan, a stretch, that familiar grin spreading across his face as he looked around. "Damn," he muttered, laughing under his breath. "We had a good night, huh?" I didn't answer. I just kept looking at him. The same brother who used to steal from our mother's purse, who lied to our father's face, who made me believe every mistake was somehow my fault. He caught my stare and smirked like it was all a joke. "You'll clean this up," I said quietly. He blinked, then laughed, that same careless, mocking laugh that used to make my stomach turn. "Sure," he said, brushing it off. "Relax. It's just a little mess," I smiled back, but it wasn't the kind of smile he was used to. Something inside me had gone still, a kind of stillness that comes right before the storm. His laugh echoed again, bouncing off the broken glass and the stains on the floor, and that sound, that empty, arrogant sound, was the moment I knew my patience had finally run out. Revenge rarely arrives as a single thunderclap. It is patient. It is small gestures that add up until you look back and see a pattern, a plan hidden in ordinary kindness. I fed him breakfast as if nothing had happened, set a plate on the table, and watched him eat like a man who believed the world owed him favors. I slipped him an envelope one morning, small bills folded neat. He took it and smiled like a man who had already counted on my forgiveness. He said I was soft. He said I'd always be soft. I let him say it. He bragged about how easy I was to manipulate, how I still dressed like a woman who wanted to be liked. He invited his friends and introduced me as the rich little sister. They laughed and called me names between sips of wine. I smiled and poured more. I learned the cadence of their arrogance, every cheap joke they used to mark territory. I let them feel at home, because home was where I was lacing the seams of a trap. No one saw the cameras I had. I placed them in plain sight, then softened their edges with frames and foliage. They thought I was making the villa cozier. They posed for photos, joked and drank, and I collected their faces in pixels, the way they looked when they believed taking had no cost. At night, I sat with a laptop, headphones on, listening back to conversations that had cut me for years. The casual cruelty, the offhand promises about never changing, the jokes that always landed at someone else's expense. I filed them like evidence. I drafted documents, precise and legal sounding, and had a lawyer prepare papers that would look official to anyone who wanted to be fooled. The plan was not to destroy in one blow. It was to create a careful collapse that would feel inevitable. So I pretended to be gentle. I pretended to be sentimental. I laughed at their jokes and played the part they expected while I tightened the screws around their small empires of lies. Control felt sharp and clean, like a blade you could hold without trembling. Every move felt deliberate, a quiet arithmetic of consequences I had learned the hard way over years and nights alone. When I went to bed, I slept differently, not with the panic that came the night he first broke in, but with a focused quiet, a readiness that hummed under my skin. I would give them safety, and then take it away. The thought made me steady. It made me ready for what I had to do next. I told him a lie that felt almost tender when I said it. I'm investing in a new property. Want in? I watched his face change the way a storm changes the sky, hope flaring, greed sharpening, every old habit waking like a muscle that remembered how to move. He leaned forward as if I'd handed him a map to something he'd always believed he deserved. I laid everything out like a proper pitch. Folded papers, glossy prints, a ledger with numbers that looked practiced, bank statements with stamps, and a title deed that carried a name similar enough to fool anyone who skimmed. I watched him touch the paper the way he used to touch other people's things. Casual, claiming. His friends crowded the table, eyes bright, voices low and hungry. They asked questions he already knew how to answer. He smiled and answered like a man who sold trust for a living. He became the salesman I remembered, the way his voice slid between charm and coercion. He spoke about margins and quick flips, about how they could double their money in months. He used the same lines he'd used on our parents, the same reasoning that made forgiveness feel like weakness. He talked fast, punctuated with laughs that tried to cover the smell of desperation. I let him. Every word he threw out became another knot in the rope he was tying around his own neck. When he pushed his palm under the table and slid me a folded stack of bills, I didn't flinch. They were real cash, heavy, warm, the literal proof that people still bought into him. His friends matched him, each one adding their share like a ritual. I watched the money move like a river into my hands, and I felt neither triumph nor guilt in that instant. I felt the clean, precise knowledge that the next move would be unavoidable. He signed where I told him to sign. He didn't read the fine print. He never did. He trusted the flash and the promise. He signed his name with the same flourish he used when he'd forged my signatures years ago, as if handwriting could replace conscience. I filmed him doing it, I watched the angle of his wrist, the way his smile softened when he convinced himself this time it was different. Later, when I replayed the footage, his gestures looked like choreography, practiced, rehearsed, convincing. He lied to himself as much as he lied to the others. He said things like, "This is our chance," as if the word "our" could rewrite history. I let him say it. I let him build that illusion until it strutted like a house of cards ready to fall. I sent him the contract with a flourish, stamped, notarized looking, convincing. I watched him initial every page, a tiny mechanical surrender. He didn't see the small alterations I'd woven into the documents, clauses that would make anyone who signed complicit, signatures that traced a path straight to legal entanglement. He didn't notice because he never looked close enough to see his own end coming. As they left that night, pockets lighter and heads higher, he hugged me like we were close again, whispering, "You were right to trust me." He believed he'd won. I walked him to the door, held the camera steady in my pocket, and felt a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with finality. He had sold his faith in himself for a quick return. He had signed his own downfall, and when the papers sat in my safe, humming with consequence, I understood how small and certain justice could be. When the money finally changed hands, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even count it. I just sat at the dining table and listened to the quiet hum of the villa. Every part of the plan was in motion, every piece exactly where I'd placed it. All that was left was to turn the mirror around, to let him see himself the way everyone else soon would. That night, I opened my laptop, scrolled through the recordings, and clipped the best moments. My brother bragging about his deals, laughing about his scams, saying, "She'll never know. She's too naive." He had no idea those words would become the sound of his own undoing. I uploaded them anonymously, sent them to the investors he'd scammed years ago, the ones who had never gotten their money back. I didn't include a message. The clips spoke for themselves. By morning, the fallout had begun. His phone rang nonstop. He walked around the villa pacing, shouting into the receiver, denying everything. But the videos were already everywhere. His face, his voice, his arrogance, all on display. The same people who once praised him now turned on him. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. One by one, they vanished into silence, the kind that only guilt or fear can create. I watched him from the hallway. His hair was messy, his shirt unbuttoned, his movements frantic. He didn't look like the man who had walked into my villa full of confidence. He looked like a boy cornered by his own lies. His hands shook as he scrolled through messages, muttering, "This can't be happening." I didn't say a word. I just watched. There was a strange calm in seeing him like that, the calm of balance being restored. But underneath it, something else moved. A quiet ache that I hadn't expected. He was still my brother, still the same person who used to build paper forts with me when we were kids, before life turned him into someone I couldn't save. Watching him fall apart didn't feel like triumph. It felt like mourning something that had already died long ago. He threw his phone against the wall and sat on the couch, breathing hard. For the first time in years, there was no smirk, no act, no mask. Just defeat. And as much as I wanted to hate him, I felt only emptiness, the kind that comes when revenge finally runs out of oxygen. I had taken everything from him, and yet, the silence that followed didn't sound like victory. It sounded like the end of something I'd once loved. He found me on the balcony that night. I had been sitting there for hours, listening to the wind push against the glass, the sound of his pacing echoing faintly from below. When the door slid open, I didn't move. His reflection appeared first, hair wild, eyes bloodshot, breathing like he'd run miles. He looked nothing like the man who used to walk into every room as if it belonged to him. "You did this," he said, His voice cracked, trembling, not with anger but disbelief. He wanted me to deny it, to give him a version of the story that would make him the victim again. But I didn't. I looked at him and said quietly, "You broke into my home." "I just returned the favor." His jaw tightened. For a second, I saw something flicker. Pride, regret, confusion. He stepped closer, the smell of alcohol still faint on his clothes. "You ruined me," he whispered, eyes searching mine for some hint of softness. I didn't offer any. "No," I said. "You ruined yourself." I just made sure everyone finally saw it. He reached out suddenly, his hand closing around my arm, hard enough to hurt. But I didn't flinch. I'd felt worse pain before, the kind that doesn't bruise on the skin but settles under it. "You could have helped me," he said again, voice breaking now. "You could have just helped." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. Help? That word coming from him felt obscene. He'd stolen from me, lied to me, blamed me for every consequence he created. And now he wanted help? I looked at him and said, "I did help you. I helped you see who you are." For a moment, he just stared. The fight went out of him like air leaving a balloon. His grip loosened. He stepped back, shaking his head. "You think this makes you better than me?" he said softly. "It doesn't." "Maybe not," I replied. "But it makes me free." He stood there, swaying slightly, eyes glassy. For the first time, I didn't see the older brother who once towered over me, who shouted loud enough to make me small. I saw the boy who never learned what boundaries meant, the boy who mistook forgiveness for permission. He turned away without another word, shoulders slumped, the weight of his own choices finally pressing down on him. I stayed where I was, watching the night swallow him as he walked back inside. For years, I'd dreamed of this confrontation, of saying everything I'd kept buried. But now that it had happened, the victory felt hollow, like shouting into an empty room. And yet, somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the moment he finally realized he'd lost control of the story. For days, he didn't leave. He moved around the villa like a ghost, quiet, pale, shrinking a little more each morning. I'd find his empty coffee cups in the kitchen, his shoes by the door, his silence filling every room that used to feel like mine. There were moments when I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He slept in the guest room, curtains drawn tight, barely eating. Sometimes I heard him crying softly through the walls, or talking to himself, muttering fragments of excuses. I told myself it didn't matter, that he was just another problem waiting to leave. But the sound of his broken voice chipped at something old inside me, something that remembered when we were just brother and sister, not this, not strangers sharing a house built on betrayal. On the fourth morning, I found him in my study. The drawer to my desk was open, papers scattered across the floor. He froze when he saw me, hands still halfway inside the drawer where I kept cash for emergencies. Our eyes met, and everything, the guilt, the pity, the fragments of old love, turned to dust. "Get out," I said quietly. He stammered, tried to smile. "I was just looking for money," I finished for him. "You were looking for money." His face crumpled, desperate. "Please. I have nowhere else to go. I'll pay you back this time. I swear I'll change." His voice cracked on the last word, just like it used to when he was a kid trying to talk his way out of trouble. For a second, I almost believed him. For a second, I saw the boy who used to stand behind me on the first day of school, scared, but pretending not to be. Then I remembered every lie that followed, every promise that turned to poison. Mercy had already cost me too much. I picked up my phone, and when he realized what I was doing, he stopped talking. I didn't raise my voice, didn't explain. I just dialed. "There's a man in my house," I said. "He won't leave." He stood there frozen, watching me the whole time, eyes wide, breathing hard. When the police arrived, he didn't fight. He didn't even speak. He just let them cuff him, head lowered, the weight of it finally too much to carry. As they led him out the door, he looked back at me one last time, not angry, not even pleading, just hollow, like I'd killed something that once mattered to both of us, and maybe, in a way, I had. The villa was too quiet after that night, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, just lingers, heavy and hollow. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled clean again. No cigarette smoke, no sweat, no whiskey lingering on the furniture. Yet peace has a sound, and this silence wasn't peace. It was guilt dressed up as calm. I tried to tell myself I'd done the right thing. I repeated it like a prayer. He broke in. He lied. He stole. I had every right to protect what was mine. But the image of him in handcuffs wouldn't leave my head. His wrists bound, his eyes unfocused, that look of confusion, like he couldn't quite understand how it had come to this. The first few days were strange. I'd wake up expecting to hear him moving in the kitchen, coughing, pacing, leaving his presence in the air. But there was nothing. The house had gone back to how it was before, perfect, organized, untouched. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm, staring at the wreckage and wondering if calm was supposed to feel this empty. At night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance, faint and unreachable. I thought about every decision that had led here, every word I hadn't said, every time I'd chosen silence instead of confrontation. Maybe he had always been broken, long before I ever decided to break him further. Maybe he was never built for peace. Still, my mind played both sides of the story like a courtroom with no verdict. One part of me whispered that I'd only given him what he'd earned. The other asked whether I'd gone too far. Revenge always looks clean from the outside, until it's yours, until you're the one watching the fallout, and realizing that justice and cruelty sometimes share the same face. I tried to drown the thoughts with another glass, but they floated right back up. Memories of the bruises, the shouting, the manipulation, the laughter that always followed when he saw how much it hurt. Those memories steadied me. They reminded me why this quiet was necessary. I looked around the room, the polished floors, the still air, the faint reflection of my face in the glass, and whispered to no one in particular. He walked in. I just showed him the door. The echo of my own voice hung there for a moment, before dissolving into the silence. And in that stillness, I realized that peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from surviving what you should have never had to endure. Months slipped by before the phone rang with his voice on the other end. Soft, older, worn down to something almost human. "It's me," he said. "I'm calling from rehab." I didn't speak, just listened to the uneven rhythm of his breathing. The arrogance that once filled every word was gone. What remained was something quieter, maybe regret. After a long silence, he said, "You destroyed me." The words came out flat, but they landed deep. I could have defended myself, but there was nothing left to argue about. "Maybe," I said, "but you built the fire." He laughed once, short and dry. "You were right," he whispered, "about me." Then, after a pause that felt longer than the years between us, he said, "Thank you." It didn't sound like forgiveness. It sounded like surrender, a strange kind of peace I'd never heard in his voice before. And before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone, waiting for the guilt that never came. There was sadness, yes, but not the kind that begged for another chance. It was the quiet ache of something that had finally ended. That night, I walked through the villa in silence. My fingers brushed along the cool walls, the corners where his laughter once echoed, the doors he used to slam open without knocking. Everything felt still. Lighter. The air no longer carried the tension of his presence, only the calm that follows when a wound has closed for good. For the first time, this place didn't feel like a fortress built to keep him out. It felt like closure built from ruin, a reminder that sometimes peace doesn't come from winning or even forgiving. It comes when you stop letting the fire burn you just because you were the one who lit the match. A year passed before his name found its way back to me. The envelope was thin, official-looking, marked by the kind of handwriting that doesn't belong to him. Neat, careful, unfamiliar. Inside was a letter from the rehab center. He was gone. Heart failure, they said. Peaceful. Quick. For a long time, I just stared at the paper. My first thought wasn't grief or even shock. It was disbelief that his story had actually ended. After everything, the chaos, the lies, the noise, the world had decided to end him quietly. Then I saw it, folded inside the report. A small handwritten note, creased and uneven. His handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Just one line. You were right. I should have knocked. I read it once. Then again and again until the words began to blur. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was something else. A moment of understanding that had come too late for either of us to use. I tried to imagine the version of him who wrote it. Sober, sitting in some small room with a pen, maybe realizing for the first time that all the doors he'd broken down were the same ones that could have saved him if he'd just waited to be let in. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt a quiet ache settle deep inside me, the kind that doesn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not revenge, just rest. That night, I placed the note in the fireplace. The paper curled, darkened, and turned to ash slowly, like it didn't want to let go. The flame flickered once before fading into embers. I watched it until the last glow disappeared. There was no satisfaction, no victory, just silence, steady, clean, and final. And as the ashes drifted up the chimney and vanished into the dark, I realized maybe revenge had never been the cure. Maybe all I'd ever wanted wasn't justice or closure. Maybe I just wanted the noise to stop. Sometimes revenge doesn't end with victory. It ends with the quiet truth that justice can't fix what love already ruined.